Hi everyone, can everybody hear me?
You can't.
Hi, my name is Nigel Kane. I'm a Senior Program Manager with the Cloud and Data Center Management Division. And this is not your average presentation. So you notice I've got three of my colleagues up here with me. And we're going to have a little bit of a turbulent discussion. So we've been having as we've been getting together to talk about this session and how we were going to present it, the idea was it would be like a cozy chat. We'd sit down together and talk about the best practices and things that we learned. And it kind of got a little bit interesting in terms of the debate and discussion. So you'll see at the side of your seat, there's a seat belt. You want to tighten that up? Because it's going to get a little bit turbulent right now. So why don't we just make a round of introductions? So Adam, why don't we start with yourself?
Yeah, I'm Adam Fazio. I'm a solution architect in our consulting organization, and I worked with several of our TAP customers on the System Center 2012 private cloud scenario.
Hi, my name is Kathleen Wilson. I'm currently a program manager, but 6 months ago I was a consultant, Microsoft Consulting Services Canada, and I had a private cloud customer in the TAP program. So I'm here to share. The reason why I was asked here is actually I have real world experience. And it's just not product marketing stuff that you hear all the time, which you've heard a lot about the cloud. So I can actually tell you some of the pitfalls or gotchas when making your journey to the cloud.
So I thought this was advanced application development with .NET Framework and WCF. I'm Ryan Sokolowski. I'm a senior consultant with Microsoft Consulting Services, and I just spent the last 6 months doing a System Center 2012 private cloud deployment for a major U.S. customer.
So these guys represent a sample of some of the consultants we've had working with our private cloud customers. And what I wanted to do with this session is really distill and get out the kind of key learning points so you can take them away and kind of use those in your own environments. So our agenda basically kind of works like this. We've got a number of key topics or key areas that we want to focus on. There are a number of others, but we kind of picked these out as the ones that generated the most discussion between the three of us. So the idea is that we're going to talk about the strategy, kind of the thoughts, the business processes, the kind of concepts that we get into in respect to private cloud. And then these esteemed colleagues of mine are going to debate and discuss them. So we're going to have quite an interesting area and time together. So the first part of it, we're going to look at planning. How do we get this private cloud up and running? What are the things that we need to think about in order to enable the private cloud itself? Then the infrastructure. What components, what are the things that we need to install, we need to set up? What's the order of things that we need to follow in order to be successful? Then we're going to switch it around a little bit. From the user perspective, how do they basically request service from IT? How do they get the things out of the cloud that they want? How do we get to approval and deployment? And finally, Kathleen's favorite, which is continuous service improvement.
And another thing too, Nigel, can you not use user in this presentation? User reminds me of a drug addict. It's consumer or customer.
Thank you. As I said, lively debate is coming up. So in terms of capabilities, you've probably seen this slide many, many times before. So we're looking at pooled resources, the elasticity, the ability to scale up and scale down depending upon your resource requirements. And I can see a number of you with your eyes glazing over, yes, we've seen this slide before and all the capabilities that this introduces. But one of the key things that we want to talk about is how does this translate into real-world application? So guys, I know we've had some discussion about elasticity. Elasticity meaning that when I request something, when demand goes up, I can expand my capability with an expectation that when that demand or that capacity requirement goes away, that then I downscale, I remove some of the things that I've requested. Is that your experience?
No.
Do you want to maybe explain a little bit more?
Well, that elastic word kind of makes me a little crazy because I always see things growing. I never see shrinking. So as my customer, they continue to grow. They're at 700 virtual machines in their private cloud, and nobody's clawed any back. So this could be possibly that you're not charging. There's no chargeback model in existence. So somebody's not seeing a bill, right? You ask the machine, or it's too cheap. It's like one of those things you constantly pay for on your credit card. It's just a small amount, like $5 a month, and you just forget about it. And then one day you look at yours, it's like, hey, why do I still have this subscription? I'm not even using it. So I think that elasticity is that, it's a great term. Maybe it's because it's new and people are growing their private clouds, but I haven't seen the shrink part. I'm sorry, Nigel.
And I think it depends, again, on the customer. By contrast, at my customer, we did implement a VM deprovisioning workflow to be able to do the opposite of the expansion so that we could do contraction with those.
Well, we had that.
workloads.
We had the same workflow. Did anybody use yours, though? That's my thing, is like we have the provision of VM workflow and we have decommission, but nobody ever clicked on that from the portal. Decommission my VM. It was always provision, provision, provision.
Right.
So you mentioned one of the key things there, I think, that comes up in a number of discussions, which is all this concept of charge back and show back. Do your customers use that?
Yeah, my customer does.
In my space, it's primarily showback. You could call it the walk of shame if you've got a huge amount of resources provisioned, but your utilization is really low or nothing. What are you doing with all this unused capacity? And it's, you've got to explain that to your management.
So as you can see, for each one of these, we spent a lot of time debating each one of these components in here in terms of the delivery of the service and what it meant for our customers. And this is just a snippet, an example of the debate and discussion we had. So as I said, it's going to be an interesting, a turbulent discussion, but that's exactly what we want to share with you.
And I know you'll have some questions, so if you could try to hold them to the end, because the way we're going to be doing this is we're probably going to answer your question in the next slide, if you can do that. But if it's really urgent, we will maybe have one or two during the presentation, but we want to get through it first.
So we looked at some of the concepts of the private cloud, guys. What is the reality? We talked a lot about the concept of chargeback, showback, and elasticity. But when I'm looking at planning a private cloud, what are the considerations? What are the key things I need to think about, even before I get anywhere near the technology?
Well, with my engagement, actually, 300 hours was spent on planning. It was all about planning. It was all documented. We knew exactly what was going on. It was actually my dream engagement. I couldn't believe it. But the thing is, when we talk about private cloud, it's like, that's nice, it's fluffy, it's in the sky. Cloud is such a overused term, I think, right now, because you can't really define it. So what was key with my customers, we had to define what the service was and how you can use it and what workloads. So our private cloud was focused on application test and development. So that was very clear up front, and we actually took the time to do the vision scope, communicate that, and that's all that it is. And we have to share that vision. And then I think some people were in my other session that ruthless standardization leads to better opportunities for automation. I'm going to use that one again. You have to be ruthlessly standard. You have to standardize everything, because the idea is the cloud gives you self-service and you want to automate as much as possible. But if it's not standardized, then you can't deliver consistent service.
So going back, let's bring the other guys in. When you think about planning, what are the sort of things you consider, or as part of that planning exercise, that were most important in successful deployment of your infrastructure?
Key thing I saw consistently across the early adopters was needing to clearly articulate the business value. Not just doing infrastructure for infrastructure's sake, but what, at the end of the day, what capabilities is it going to provide, and how's the business going to really thrive from that? So time to market was a huge one. But in order to actually achieve time to market, you can't just provision more stuff, more infrastructure. You need to actually understand from the application perspective how it's going to be used, what apps are going on there, what networks they need to connect to, what the authentication is going to look like coming in, how people are going to get to those applications once they're out there. So it really pushed the infrastructure guys into the app space.
Right?
I would echo that the time invested up front is really what's going to prove the benefit of the private cloud to the organization. And there's a number of different ways of justifying a private cloud deployment. My customer, for example, used primarily power cost savings across a couple of different data centers and space reutilization as their justification for the budget.
But again, the other thing is like, how are you going to run it? What are the roles and the processes and the people that are going to do it? That was, I think, the biggest thing. It's like, it's great that you have all this technology. Technology is the easy part. It's like, how are you going to run it once you build it?
So what I'm hearing basically is a number of key things. One, I need to understand what the cloud is. Secondly, I need to understand how I'm going to get there. And thirdly, I need to think about, once I've got there, how I manage and run it.
Yeah, and get better at it.
Okay. So how many of you guys have seen this slide before?
Oh, not this one again.
I'm sure you've seen it. Has everybody seen it every day this week? Twice a day?
Okay.
3 times a day?
So I can cut my little speech on this one down to about 5 minutes instead of half an hour. Would you guys like that? So just all I wanted to do with this one is just focus on a few key points. When you're building a private cloud infrastructure, there are a number of technology components from System Center that you need to put into play. Clearly, virtual machine manager for your fabric, operations manager for your fabric monitoring. Orchestrator is a requirement to manage a large number of machines and provide that reduction in terms of administrators to the number of servers and hosts you've got out there. But the key thing is, when I've got all that fabric stuff, when I've got all the monitoring and all the automation, then I need to provide the service to the customer. That's where Service Manager comes in, and its integration with all the other components. So net, what we've got here is a number of components of System Center that you need to deploy to get that cloud up and running. And what we need to think about is, if we're going from a greenfield site, what's the order? How do we go from, I want a cloud, to I have the capability, I have the infrastructure, and I have all the pieces so I can start running it?
So Nigel, I know all of you have different definitions of what a cloud is. Most customers have different concepts. What would constitute like the smallest instance of a private cloud, and what would be the installation order based off of this slide?
Great question. I mean, the key tenet, the key piece, if you like, is going to be Virtual Machine Manager. So I need that. Actually, go back a little bit. I need to think about the hypervisor that I'm going to have there. So I have my hypervisor, then I have my Virtual Machine Manager to abstract it and bring out the clouds.
Right.
And then from there, I want to put in my monitoring solution. Now, if it's a small environment, that's probably as much as I want to start with from a fabric point of view. Then I can layer System Center Service Manager on top and give myself the self-service capability. As I start to expand out the number of servers and the number of virtual machines, I can bring in Orchestrator to start automating many of those tasks. So that would be my recommended order. Guys, what about you?
That's generally what we saw. The key is that these pieces are integrated together, so that as new services come online, you get automatic, incident remediation, automatic monitoring of your fabric and your workloads, because it's a dynamic environment now. So things definitely need to be tightly integrated.
My customer already had a production cloud, and we actually had to upgrade to upgrade to beta software for a production environment. It was nail biting, because especially when you're managing over 400, at that time it was like 400 VMs in Virtual Machine Manager, and it's like, oh, here, take some beta code and upgrade your environment. We're doing it in production.
But I think the key lesson, you brought that already in the planning, is planning. You've got to work out how you're going to do this, the order in which this is going to go, and how you're going to do it.
Yeah, that took a long time. Also, it was testing. We had to do a lot of testing, and then I got some friends in the product group to validate it would work.
Always good to have friends, isn't it?
It's good to have friends in good places, I guess.
So I guess from this, okay, we've got a number of components, we've got an installation order. We may have different installation orders depending on what we've got, but there are some key lessons that we need to learn or understand about the infrastructure, some things that are important to know going into this. So guys, tell me a little bit about the recommendations you've thought about in respect of infrastructure.
So this slide kind of represents a handful of best practices and tips and tricks that we put together from an infrastructure perspective, and they're broken into a couple different areas. First is obviously preparation. As you're doing all the upfront planning for your private cloud, you certainly want to confirm any third-party software support and integration capabilities. On the storage side, you have SMIS providers that you want to verify and validate that you have that functionality with your storage vendor. And other third-party software, getting into backup products. We had a situation where we were planning on using a particular third-party backup solution, and discovered that particular solution did not support backing up CSV, cluster shared volumes. So that took a last-minute change of direction. Things about SQL. SQL is obviously the foundation of your private cloud for most of these products from a database perspective. There are considerations around the collation, doing your due diligence up front to do database sizing so that you're ready to coordinate and work with your database administrators. At most organizations, you're working cross-silo, so you have to have all your ducks in a row.
Hey, and you know what, Ryan? I'm going to add something to the SQL collation. Is you can't go back. That's the problem. Is like I can't undo. Is like once it's done. The other thing too is get a SQL DBA in to help you with sizing, because I know I'm really keen on Service Manager. It's got a lot of I/O, right? A disk I/O, and you need to slice and dice your SAN storage properly. So you know that's one thing too. If I had to add on the SQL part.
Absolutely, that's perfect. Another one that we ran into, we had an environment which was cross-domain and ultimately a disjoint namespace, and there were some catches around doing virtual machine manager distributed key management, which is storing the VMM recovery keys in Active Directory, in an Active Directory container. Make a long story short, the recommendation would be just don't do it cross-domain. Do it in a single domain if at all possible. And this stuff is all documented now, currently, in TechNet articles. So that's available.
Well, that aged you about 5 years, didn't it?
It did. It was a painful process, but it's another example as well of the benefit that the early adopters provide to Microsoft as well by partnering with Microsoft. So some of these situations come to the surface and are discovered, and then that just improves the quality of the product and the documentation for all of our customers. A couple other quick examples of things to consider are turning off the default behavior of Virtual Machine Manager to auto-import your networks. If you're working in a complex environment, you're going to have perhaps 2 10-gig converged network adapters that are teamed. You're going to have a number of different VLANs. You may have more network adapters. VMM is basically just going to suck all those in, and it's going to really get confusing in VMM. I would just recommend turning that off, deleting anything that gets imported initially, and creating your own logical and virtual network definitions. It's just a little more straightforward that way.
And that can mess up your configuration management database and Service Manager in the end.
Absolutely. A couple other quick ones. Using variables in your orchestrator runbooks. This is one that might not be obvious, but if you're doing a significant private cloud deployment, you're going to do all of this in a proof of concept environment, in a test lab. So as you're putting all that time and making the investment in writing all the runbooks in Orchestrator, you don't want to hard code everything to, say, server names. You don't want to hard code the name of the Service Manager management server in your runbook. If you use variables, you can, when you're done validating the functionality, you can export all your runbooks, move it over to production, and just redefine your variables. Put in the new parameters, and you're set. So that's a great tip. And the last one is kind of obvious, but it really comes into play when you're talking about all these System Center components that are interoperating together and all the different service accounts and permissions that you need. Seriously sit down and write this stuff out and figure out what service accounts, groups, and permissions you need to define up front. Obviously, you don't want to use enterprise admin or domain admin level accounts to run everything. So use least privilege.
A little experience on that. So we took, in the TAP program, we wrote some guidance for the delivery folks, and then rolled that into the Private Cloud Fast Track program, which is sponsored by the Hyper-V team. And we really took that to the next level of defining a production class, high-scale architecture for all of these components. So we have a service account and group matrix that tells you all the service accounts, best practices for the System Center stack. Very, very detailed SQL guidance on how many instances, how many databases, how to cluster your SQL together, collation types, sizing, all that stuff, and that's going to be published very shortly. So you can.
Where
use
would
that
I
as a
get
reference.
that?
That'll be on TechNet. We have a solution hub, private cloud solution hub, and both the reference architecture and deployment guidance will be published there shortly.
I see everybody writing this down. So that's
Private Cloud Fast Track, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's actually one of the benefits we as Kathleen mentioned, one of the benefits we get working with our early adopters, which kind of brings it out to you as well, is we learn a lot of lessons during this technology adoption process, which are then bundled up into documentation, best practice guidance. We take fixes and updates from those customers, and ultimately the experience that you get is more beneficial because of that experience.
They get to experience the pain, hopefully, so you don't have to.
Yeah, and that's why you're sitting in the sessions. We also get MMS sessions for these.
Yeah, I dare say we've got a couple of TAP customers in the audience. I want to thank them for their participation in helping us get to this point.
Thank you for your patience.
Okay, so we're going to switch gears a little bit. Again, we've got a number of topics. There are a lot of topics that we wanted to cover, but these are just the kind of the key ones that occurred to us. One of the key things here, again, is the self-service component. Who's going to interface with this and start requesting service from you? Well, this is your consumers.
Yay!
This is the consumer population. They're going to start wanting, I want a virtual machine. I want access to this service. I want to be able to do this. Well, to get the promise of the cloud, we've got to make that self-service. We don't want them ringing up IT to request these things. How do we make that happen? We've got to have a portal, an easy-to-use experience, which allows them to do that. So it needs careful thought. Go back to our preparation discussion. I need to think about what services I'm going to provide to our consumer audience. In fact, indeed, I might have to segment my consumer audience because there may be certain users, certain people that have got certain rights or need to access certain things, and others that don't. So I've got to segment, maybe even segment the offerings that I'm making available to them. But Kathleen and the guys also put up a good point. When I'm requesting things, I need to understand the business value of what I'm requesting. If everything's high value, if everything's platinum level of service, high priority, all of the rest of it, and there's no visibility into costing or service levels, what am I going to choose?
Yeah.
I'm going to choose the best, just because that's the way I'm geared. I want the best for myself. And by the way, I want it yesterday.
And you know what? I have to this is going to be quite radical. I think tiered level service, like gold, silver, bronze, I think that's so old school. I think it just goes away when we talk about cloud. Like, I really do, because everybody's going to get great service, right? Maybe support-wise. Like, if my service goes down in the middle of the night, somebody's going to help me. But I don't think from a performance.
But some people do map it to costs.
Yeah.
So you have your high-cost storage and your low-cost storage.
Yeah.
Right.
And
I see that.
You call it gold and silver. You can call it really expensive and cheap.
And perhaps it's more a function of the chargeback or showback model, indicating to business units or departments within your organization what the cost will be either now or in the future. And that's the difference between chargeback and showback.
Yeah, well, I think but you've got to think about the bill. So how many people in this room understand their mobile phone bill? You read it and it's clear? Oh, you do. I've got one for you to read later. So I think that was the thing is that we did sizes, small, medium, large, and that's all you can get, right? I know in the demos you can pick how much RAM you want and everything. That's really nice, but the bills that we talked about is like when the customer gets the bill from this service, I want to be able to say, these are all my VMs, and this is what I'm paying for storage. So it was a 2-line bill, right, to make it very clear. Not how much CPU I was using and everything, right? Because, well, we were talking with them yesterday, Nigel, is they had to plan their costs for up to a year. So they had to be able to predict how much the service is going to cost them over a year. So they plan a year in advance.
One of the things we also found, and I dare say it resonates with a number of you, if you provide self-service capability, most of the business will use it. How many of you are admins? Okay, how many of you, if you're given a self-service portal, will not use a self-service portal?
Come on.
Same hands.
Say they won't. They'll go around the
So
process.
if you go around it, it's okay. Because what we need to do, though, is we need to understand where people have gone around it, where these virtual machines or these services have come from, where there's no request or no formal process been wrapped around it. We don't want, or you don't want to have, to prevent the business from being agile and being flexible. But you also want to be able to capture and understand where your virtual machines are, who's created them, what's on them. So the key point is we need to be able to tie machines that have been requested through the process and identify the ones that haven't. So let's look at this in a little more detail. From your point of view, what is it your customers have been doing in the TAP program? And how is that kind of experience and kind of become visible through request process?
Well, I guess one of the things is what I forgot is that if you want to do service requests on the Service Manager portal, you have to have that service catalog discussion. You have to. And the fact is understanding who would be consuming the service, right? So, what type of people would be coming to the portal? What would they be asking? And because and what things are we going to offer for self-service day one, and then what we're going to offer later. And then we had to plan all this out because you have to create a lot of templates. And I know you're going to do some great demos, and I can maybe point this out, but you have to create all the templates, right? So what needs approval, what doesn't? Well, you don't want to have template sprawl, but you want to know what I have to create. So I think the key is if you look at, it's a two-sided, two columns, right? The text side is the what side, and the picture is the how. But it's very hard to do the how if you don't know what you're trying to do. So the idea was the planning and documenting what we were trying to accomplish, because it was very easy to go and build it afterwards. Mm-hmm. Actually, a little side talk. We did have we were on the beta version of Service Manager. We had a management pack corruption, I remember, and we had to do a big demo for their senior management the next day. And I'm like, well, there's no sense placing a call. It's beta. If I call the Premier support, I'm not going to get any help for it because beta wasn't supported yet. And the fact is it would take a day. But we deleted the management pack. And because I had written it down, I was able to create it very quickly again. It only took us an hour, and to build up the workflow and assign all the orchestrator runbooks back in. But if it wasn't written down, I would have been in really deep doo-doo. So how it works, what we have to do is going up from the bottom. So in Virtual Machine Manager, you want to create server or service templates, right? And I'll start basically with servers just for the ease of this. So you would create these. And then what you need to do is they would be imported into the Service Manager CMDB so you can access them. Because when you're on the portal, you're requesting a VM, and then you're going to pick, in the background, you're actually picking the Virtual Machine Manager template that you're going to provision your VM with. And then you build out the request offering with a series of templates and runbooks and everything else like that, and that's what's presented to the consumer on the portal. So I guess what I'm trying to share is I took a top-down approach for planning, which really helped me build everything from the bottom up. Mm-hmm. Do you guys have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, the last bullet point there, the templates don't create themselves, and it goes back to the earlier point that Kathleen had about ruthless standardization. You really just want to define what you're going to be offering and create that limited set of virtual machine templates and work from there. Another question that I get, and I didn't run this past you guys, so I'll just wing it. Another question that I've gotten from a number of different places is, what do we do with Service Manager if we've already got an existing service management system in-house? And that actually happened to be the case at the customer that I was working with. And they were really great in understanding how we can do some custom things with Service Manager. And we used Service Manager as the CMDB for our cloud, the private cloud deployment, and we're able to push the information up from Service Manager, from the cloud, into their existing corporate service management system. So that's always an option as well. So just because you have a different third-party service management product, doesn't preclude the use of Service Manager for your cloud.
Well, we used it as an engagement tool. That's the best way to do it, because my customer had their own service management tool. We just used it. This is the engagement mechanism to request our service.
So why don't we get to our first demo?
Yeah.
Sure. Demo time.
Demo time. Yeah. How many of you seen demos this week?
I guarantee you haven't seen this one. So as Kathleen was explaining, I'm just going to show you real briefly kind of the service request process. How do you build up a service request and service offering? How do you build a service catalog? And then finally, the consumer experience of requesting resources. So I'm in VMM 2012 here, and I've got some templates built out. these could be renamed Windows Server 2012 now. I've got service templates. I don't know if you've had a chance to play around with these. We had some customers get very sophisticated with what they did with their service templates. This is just a demonstration one, but essentially it allows you to build out an end-to-end application that consists of virtual machines, disks, operating system profiles, hardware profiles, and then layer applications on top of that. And this is all native to VMM now, so you can install server roles and features via these templates.
I can kind of simplify that. It allows you to pick up things from different environments too, right? It's like, with my customer, it's like everybody's just provisioning servers, and then the application developers would go and install their own SQL, right? So what we're saying, but that was a cultural shift that we had to do because they were used to doing it themselves. So now moving to the service templates that you're talking about also requires a cultural change in the organization because IT people like to do it themselves.
Definitely culture change is going to occur.
Yeah.
Either in a friendly way or not.
So the idea is we're going to build these templates. We've got virtual machine templates and we've got service templates.
Right.
So
and
now,
in the spirit of standardization, we're not going to have next finish for installing SQL. It's all going to be standardized and basically pre-installed. So DBAs are just using their native tools. They're not having to do the installation.
Wow, that could even fix a lot of faulty applications out there in the world.
That's the idea. So I've got templates, virtual machine templates, and I've got some cloud libraries. If you've had a chance to look at cloud capability in VMM, they basically defined a set of qualities and attributes that you're going to use to define Fabric. So you can assign users to clouds, resource capabilities, which type of hypervisors can live in this cloud, and things like capacity limitations. How many virtual CPUs, how much disk, so on and so forth. Now this is where things get interesting. So from an integration perspective, this stuff is only useful if I can bring it in and connect these systems and build catalogs with them and have incidents and requests tied to those objects.
He's in Service Manager now too, if you haven't seen it yet.
Now I've switched to Service Manager, thank you. And I'm looking at the native connectors that come built in to Service Manager. You create these, point them to your other System Center components, and you're now bringing in objects into Service Manager's CMDB. So in the case of what I was just showing you, I've got the Virtual Machine Manager connector here.
And this, just as a point, those connectors are really, if you're not familiar with it, that's really kind of the secret sauce that makes all of these different System Center components connect to each other and become that private cloud.
Yep. So that's how we kind of make real the term fabric management, is through the integration of these products. So you can see the templates I was just showing you in VMM are now here in Service Manager. My service templates are here. The clouds that I've defined are here. Okay. And what else can I show you?
So the idea, Adam, is we've built our templates, we've created our clouds, we've created our fabric, and now what we want to do is present those out as service catalog entries so somebody can request a VM or a service. How do we do that?
Exactly. So how we do that is through essentially Service Manager has a portal component. I'll show you that in a moment. And you have the concept of a service catalog which consists of service offerings, and within service offerings you have request offerings. So you can just think of them as a nesting or a grouping. Service offerings would be a large category like cloud services, network services, printing services, whatever, and a request offering would be something granular and specific.
But they go under. So that's the way is you publish a service offering and you put your request offerings underneath the service. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So let's see, what does the user see?
So I've got my service catalog a little bit defined here. I'll pop over to the portal. Now this is just the generic gray portal that ships. You can make this, any rainbow color you like and customize the logo so it's more friendly to your corporation. So these headings you see here are my service offerings. So I've got hardware, IT services, private cloud and data center, and then these are the request offerings nested within those. If I go ahead and pop one open.
So the point is this is totally customizable.
Yeah, absolutely extensible and customizable. You can build it out any which way you like. It can be tied to configuration items that are connected via System Center, or it can just be a generic request. I'd like my car washed, and it just sends off an email and and notify
The
somebody
valet
of
gets
that.
it.
In this case, we're going to show you sort of how to automate these requests as they come through.
And again, when you're planning your service catalog, you got to think of your service catalog from the context of who is going to use it, and you got to use that right terms. Like, don't do your service catalog in a vacuum, because you got to kind of look at, does this make sense?
Planning is key. Yep.
Right? Where do I click?
So the cook might say, in an example of a restaurant, in the menu being the service catalog, we have chicken tonight. But as someone who's dining there, I'd like to know what kind of chicken, what's on it, what does it come with, those types of things. So understanding your consumer is really critical there.
And the point too is all of this is configurable. So I may have more options on my in my service catalog than Adam does. I may have more options and more kind of the scope of the things that I can do are different.
Depending on who you authenticate to that portal as, yes, it will display back what you're authorized to see.
And to extend that as well, the Service Manager portal is extensible as well. That's one thing that we did at my customer is we took App Controller and embedded that as an additional tab within the Service Manager portal, because what that does is that it then exposes virtual machine control functionality so that users can start, stop, and shut down their own VMs without generating a service request or calling the administrator.
I want to do that for
Yeah.
my customer. But the other thing too is what was minimizing the branding of our portal at our customer was so important. That's what the director wanted. He wanted the colors on there. Like, we had to do that. That was one of the first things we had to do. Is like make it ours. And they're like, no, he doesn't want that. I say, no, he wants that color in there. And we had to pick the green and everything. It was actually quite easy to do.
So Adam, let's go and run through the rest of that demo.
So just to finish up, I'm going to request a virtual machine. You can see the configuration items have come through here to the portal. Maybe I don't want to offer all these templates to this particular user, but in this case, I can provision whichever template I'd like. I can provide a business justification and just say.
So not only are the options in the service catalog and the things that you saw Adam choose, but also here you can be even more granular in respect of what templates they can access and what options there are required.
Right. This I'm showing you sort of the most simplistic way to build out a virtual machine request here. It can be very extensible, and you can allow users to select quantity of memory, storage, so on and so forth. In this case, I'm just scoping it down to predefined templates that they can pick.
But it's just so much easier to manage that way, right? I think it's just a better service aspect.
One thing we found in the TAP and in our other offerings in consulting is that there's no sort of one-size-fits-all portal. Everyone wants a portal, and everyone wants a different portal. Mm-hmm. And so the key is that you can customize this thing to your choosing.
Yeah, that's true. And you were talking on that previous page. There was the virtual machine manager templates that pop up. Mm-hmm. How you scope who sees what is done through roles and Service Manager. So that's why you need to understand who's using Service Manager first.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Role-based authentication is used here, and that's key to get right. So as a consumer, I'm going to submit this request. Of course, I'm then going to want to know what happened, what's going on with my request. I said I need it right now. So I have the ability to just view all my outstanding service requests here in the portal. In this case, it's a standard change, so it's going to automatically be approved and trigger an orchestrator runbook that's going to go provision whatever I ask for.
And that's one of the key things we build into Service Manager and Orchestrator is this interface between the two products. So Service Manager can invoke an orchestrator runbook. So conceptually what happens is I request something from the portal, it gets approved, and then Service Manager kicks off an orchestrator runbook to deliver whatever I've requested. And an orchestrator can reach back into Service Manager, update the status of what's going on. So this is not just about cloud. You can use this model for anything that you can automate. So I want access to an application. I want this to happen. I want membership of a group. You can use that same model.
Yep. And so in this case, that particular service request is calling this runbook, which Service Manager knows about, again, because of the connector. It knows about all the runbooks I've defined in Orchestrator, and I can actually tie those runbooks to service requests and get that integration.
Yeah, I think we got to move on a bit.
Please.
Okay, let's go back to the slides.
Yeah, thank you.
So that's just an example of creating requests. One of the other things we got into a huge debate between the three of us, well, the four of us, is really around the approval process. So some of the things that I've been hearing from discussing with customers like yourself is when I get into the approval process, when I request something, if I request deployment in production, the approval process is different from when I request deployment into a test environment. In test, it can just be automatically approved. If it goes into production, I'm likely to require a bunch of additional steps to make it happen. So I want a process, an approval process, that is dynamic based upon what I'm requesting. So who's making the request, the cloud into which it's going, the priority, the virtual machine, or the template that is being used. I want those to be the parameters that drive the approval process. Some changes, as I mentioned, could be automatically approved. Some will require line manager approval. The idea is, hopefully, as you get better and better understanding of the way things work, you start automating more and more of this process.
So that was great, but you actually have to figure out the approval process end to end, so you have to write it down. And I had this really great tool called Microsoft Word that helps me design workflows in Service Manager. So what we had to do is build it out step by step, start to finish, of what we were going on. And it's easy because you go step one. What are the inputs? What are the outputs? What notifications, emails, triggers, things that I want happen? And we wrote it down. The other thing, too, is that I noticed with my customers that they had outside people approve from a financial perspective. And we had to really start looking at how we measured the service level agreement, because we changed the objective to be that your VM would be provisioned within 48 hours after financial approval, right? Because we couldn't, if that person goes on holidays, you only have one person doing the approval, your process will break. Also, to another thing about approvals, when you have too many, people are just going to go around and, Adam, can you just go to Virtual Machine Manager and create me a couple of VMs? They're not going to use the portal. So the idea is that it's great that you can do all the approvals, but you can also break your process by overusing approvals.
It needs to be scoped appropriately.
Yeah, well, and it has to make sense. So the other thing is tracking for reporting. What do you need to track from a reporting perspective? So, because you need to know what you need to put in the fields and what you need to capture in your service request, because what do you have to report back to the business, right? The other things, too, is the financial approval. Everybody was doing it through email, so we had to take the actual request and cut it and paste it in the email, because nobody was going to go into Service Manager, open up the request, and have a look at it. So we had to figure out, okay, what do we have to put in the email notifications and everything? And watch out for template sprawl, because, well, we've got a bit of template sprawl going on here in our demo environment. So you do. So because ideally, approval, if you had like a change advisory board approval, one should be good. And you should use it for every service request or change request in Service Manager, right? You need to normalize your templates. And
ruthless standardization
leads to better opportunities for automation, yes.
There it is.
So guys, let's look at how this is actually implemented within the product. I think we've talked a lot about planning. How does this work in reality?
Yeah. Well, again, this is a what, how slide. So the text is referring to the what, and how you do it is driven down from the diagram here on the, I guess it's everybody's right-hand side. So working from the bottom up is that you would start the processes, well, what Adam showed it too, right? So you would import the Virtual Machine Manager templates into Service Manager, right? And you would create them out. And Orchestrator will call and get that virtual machine template to provision the VM through Virtual Machine Manager.
Yeah, one thing we want to kind of bring out here is, in terms of process, what's going on is that Daniel, who's our little green guy here, is approving the request through a number of different routes. Could be through the portal,
yes.
Could through email, could be through the console. When he approves it, Service Manager pushes that or instructs Orchestrator to go run that runbook. Now remember, the approval is the key point here. Right. Once that approval is given, Orchestrator goes out, makes that happen.
I'm gonna show coming up exactly how to set up approvals.
So I think we maybe should move on to the...
No, there's a couple of key things that we want to bring out. So the other key thing is, once that's happened, Orchestrator does that. That VM is created on behalf of that user. So let's complete this picture. The virtual machine is created. By integration of Virtual Machine Manager and Operations Manager, details about that Virtual Machine Manager are pushed into Operations Manager. But we're not done yet. When the virtual machine is created, Orchestrator will reach back, because that's the runbook we've created, it reaches back into Service Manager and instantiates a relationship between the newly created virtual machine and the request. So now we've got this, remember I mentioned audit trail right at the very start. We now know which request went through that process. Oh, and by the way, just to finish the picture, we've got Operations Manager down to your right. That obviously has the discovery about the virtual machine. On a synchronization interval, all that rich discovery, what it found out about that virtual machine, is passed into Service Manager. So now when I look at a virtual machine in Service Manager, I've got all the Operations Manager discovery data about that. And you may even also have Config Manager in there as well. So you're getting data feed from Config Manager, from Ops Manager, from Active Directory, all feeding the data about that virtual machine that you pushed out through this process. So let's see it.
Okay. Number 4, please.
Yep.
So earlier I showed you about request offerings and service offerings. So those are tied to templates. And in these templates, you can define things like approvers.
That's a little template sprawl, I see.
It is. But I know that all I care about is this one related to my private cloud stuff.
Yeah.
So I have a template that I'm basing all my service requests for this particular provisioning of VM in the private cloud based on. What I can do here, and this is one approach, we'll talk about the standard approach and then the Nigel approach. So a service request template basically has a series of activities that you can define. This is just a standard one, and it has an approval activity followed by the orchestrator runbook that it's going to call. And so that's also known about via the connectors. So
Yeah, let's look at that approval activity.
the approval activity we can do automatically, or we can require some kind of approval. We can have a certain number of people that need to have unanimous consensus to approve. Do you have any experiences to share?
No,
there?
I don't. No, you don't want 100% approval threshold. Like if one of 3 people can approve this, right? Because that's really can hold up the process, right? And again, people will create virtual machines not using the service request system, right? Because everybody in IT finds a backdoor.
Yeah, we're trying to eliminate those back doors. So Adam,
Yeah.
Okay. So that's one method, is a static list of reviewers and approvers. But what about the case where you want to basically have a different approver depending on, or different approval level or reviewer depending on where that resource is provisioned to? So a big difference between deploying something in test and dev and making it live in our production
Test
environment.
versus prod.
Well, our customer actually had a lookup file where we, depending on the business unit that requested, the financial approver would change every single time. So we had to use Orchestrator to go pull that information and populate the approval activity in Service Manager to put the right person's name in there. Mm-hmm. So that was actually kind of complex too.
Exactly. Well, we have a very simple runbook here that does something similar. It's basically monitoring for new service requests that come in the infrastructure area. It's making a relationship between the service request and the review activity. And then it's essentially updating that service request based on any number of definable parameters that you choose here. So in this case, I can have an activity class that is...
you want the review activity there.
Yeah, review.
So the idea is we're going to use an orchestrator runbook. So we got a standard template. But we want to use an orchestrator runbook to customize this depending on what's requested, who requested it, where it's going. So we get away from this template proliferation problem. One template and a bunch of rules.
Yeah, but there's also another best practice about the GUID ID. When you're passing it, you should be passing the GUID ID around as instead of the variables. You were telling me that, or Adam told me that.
So any orchestrator runbook development, you want to subscribe to the published data as much as you can, right? And be dynamically looking up this data and then passing that to the next item in your runbook. So get away from static values as much as you can. I think you talked about that earlier, the problems that can cause.
Yeah.
And so that's exactly what we're going to do here. I'm looking up new service requests, and I've got those IDs, and now I'm going to subscribe to those here. All right? And I'm on the update activity portion, so I'm going to update it with my my dynamic list of reviewers based on whatever attribute I like, the cloud it's going into, the SLA on that cloud, so on and so forth.
So one of the other key examples I've heard from customers is I want to create a change request or a service request, but I want the owner of the service or the owner of the virtual machine or whatever it is to be involved in the approval process. Guess what, guys? That's not natively in the Service Manager product. How do you do that? Use this process. So you can use Orchestrator to introspect into the Service Manager CNDB, find out who the owner is of that particular object, and add them into the review process. So that kind of gives you a huge amount of power in respect of customizing, tailoring the request process. So the last kind of topic we're going to touch on is managing the cloud fabric. As I said, we ended up with a whole bunch of discussion around this. And I know the guys are going to talk a lot about continual service improvement. There were a couple of key pieces that I wanted to bring out. You can use the power of the integration between these products to really help you understand where things are going and what's happening. So oftentimes what I'm seeing is that you've got an incident that occurs, and when it goes to Tier 1, the Tier 1 analyst runs a bunch of process to find out, or asks a bunch of questions to find out what's going on with that particular issue. Then it gets escalated to Tier 2 if the Tier 1 analyst can't resolve it. What does that Tier 2 analyst do? They say, can you please tell me what's this? Can you run this script? Guess what? That's most likely the script that the Tier 1 analysts use and the same questions that were asked. What happens when we get to Tier 3? Are we getting a pattern here? So the idea basically is to eliminate a lot of this and to give us the trust in the data. We can actually leverage Orchestrator when an incident's created in Service Manager from maybe an Operations Manager alert. Orchestrator can see that new incident coming in and say, aha, this is an incident about a piece of cloud fabric. I want to run some diagnostics. I want to run some tools to get that data back such that I have then the ability when I'm the Tier 1, Tier 2 analyst to actually see some more useful information about that. So it helps me troubleshoot and react.
But you can pull those results into the incident item in Service Manager. So you go out and you run, I guess that would be a PowerShell script. And you would run a PowerShell script. And you can get those results and put them into Service Manager, the incident tickets, so you could see that it's being done. But I think the private cloud is all about CSI. I know we're in Vegas, CSI, maybe different, but continuous service improvement, right? Because a cloud is not static. You can only get better if you're constantly looking at what's happening and having a plan to fix it. So reporting and reviews was something I instituted with my customers. So they had to look at the reports, what incidents were happening in the environment, how many requests were done to this month, year to date, and be able to do capacity planning because storage, it would take them almost 6 months to get more hardware put into the data center for storage. So they had to be very proactive about it. So the reviews became, they had reviews with the customers. How do you like the service? Operations reviews of how we're doing as an operations team, and also road mapping, right? What's going to go next? With this customer, we have one person focused on just doing System Center. And he is responsible for looking for all automation possibilities and implementing them. So that was really good. So service improvement plans became part of the culture. And again, problem management in Service Manager. So if you have the Ops Manager connector running with Service Manager, you can almost do problem management out of the box right away because there's a report out of the box in Service Manager. CI is firing the most incidents. So you can actually, there's a report where you can actually see that. Maybe we can show them the demo. But that's a powerful report. And a lot of people won't see it unless it's in that report. And then you got to look at other service requests that are not happening at the portal because you may need to offer these as future service request offerings to customers. So one of the things is start and stop virtual machines was one of the ones that started coming up, that maybe we should offer self-service. And I liked your thing about app controller. I think I'm going to take that one back and put that one in there. So
let's give Adam one last chance to go to a demo. I'm sure these guys want to see one more demo.
Oh yeah,
Sure.
You want to see another demo?
Yeah, I think just before that, I would add in, like was mentioned before, there's obviously cultural shift and impact to an organization. My customer affectionately referred to it in their project as radical and disruptive. And that's how they communicated that, the implementation of private cloud to their management to get the impact across.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm going to show you now is some more integration between products and then how we get from an infrastructure view to incident and problem resolution in Service Manager. So now I'm in the Operations Manager console. I'm sure it's not new to you that Operations Manager and Virtual Machine Manager can tightly integrate and do a whole series of automated functions in your environment. The one I'm going to focus on right now is alerting. So first of all, anything that's provisioned in my cloud is automatically discovered and brought into Operations Manager. So what I'm looking at here is just a diagram view to demonstrate that. All the objects that are in VMM that get provisioned are populated in here. And then depending on the management packs I have installed, we're going to have deep visibility into the VMs, applications, services, so on and so forth. Now, those, once I'm monitoring everything, as you might have experienced, the more you monitor, the more alerts you're going to see. What do we do about all these alerts? So via the Service Manager connector, we have one called the Alert connector. And that's right here. And we can do a variety of things here. So first of all, we could just bring in all of our Operations Manager alerts and raise incidents in Service Manager. That might be a little bit of a nightmare. So we can be a little bit more intelligent. We can add routing rules around these alerts. So we can have, in this case, I care just about my cloud fabric. I'm going to route alerts that comprise the infrastructure fabric to my infrastructure guys. So I'm going to have, these are high priority incidents because they are the fabric running my services. I can scope this a number of different ways. I can create a computer group that these things are a member of and scope it that way. I can have a management pack. In this case, I'm just going to say everything that has the word virtual in it, I want that alert brought over as an incident.
Actually change that to contains.
Thank you.
So the idea is basically you can create different rules which basically route incidents to different support groups or different teams.
Well, because a lot of people don't want to turn on the Ops Manager connector with Service Manager because they think they're going to get flooded, right? Because that means everybody has to open up incidents and reassign them. Doing it this way is just so
not only that, but I'm only going to bring in critical alerts that are scoped in this particular way. They're going to route to my Fabric team.
Perfect.
So I'm really managing this appropriately and making sure that incidents that might be going out via email, right, or even to people's pagers or cell phones. Does anyone have a pager anymore? I used to have to carry one. That those are the critical alerts that are just for the Fabric. The other thing we can do with incident and service request routing is we have an exchange connector for Service Manager that allows people to not only get notified via email, but actually take an action right in the email based on what it is. So in the case of a change request via this connector, you can approve or reject change requests right in the message without having to jump over to a different console.
Well, that's really good for people who are doing approvals to virtual machine approvals, that they can actually approve it from the email, because not many people sit at their desk. They're always in meetings, so they'll be approving new virtual machines being provisioned in their meetings.
Right. Hopefully it's not an important meeting. One last thing on that topic. So again, with Orchestrator, we can do some interesting things. We have a runbook here that's essentially looking for new incidents that they come in. In this case, it's related to storage. So I'm monitoring for new hardware problems that come in via this, that are Operations Manager generated, that are new. I'm going to, take a set of actions based on that. In this case, I'm going to look up on my storage system. I'm going to just get what is the disk space on my LUNs, and I'm going to update the incident with that information so that my analysts have that data. And I can have this run on a schedule, so as things change, right? And if the threshold gets below a normal level, I can close out the incident or maybe lower the severity.
So the nice thing is you can make this is just a simple example, you can make this a really much more thorough example of how to use this. So I could say, okay, I want to get disk space, I want to check the network capability, I want to look at network configuration, I want to look at open alerts and open events and try and come up with some correlation rules that basically then I can feed into the incident so that my analyst can actually see what's going on and has a full and insightful look at, okay, this is what's happened, so I can get this service back up and running faster.
Right. So one other point that Nigel made before we started here is to understand that all of these items, once you've got them integrated, are now tied together in here. So we have a relationship between the infrastructure, the services running on there, and then even the incidents and service requests that are generated against those services. So I forget how to get there to demonstrate that, honestly.
What are you going to show, sir?
Just double click on that. So the last point we're going to show here is the fact that when you look at a service in Operations Manager, you get all of the service components. Well, that service can come through into Service Manager, and you can actually see those components. But not only that, I can see all of the open incidents, the open change requests against those components. Right. So if that service is degraded, where are the incidents on that infrastructure? Which components are failing? And basically, is somebody working on it to fix it?
Right.
Yeah, but also too, you can do this to do risk and impact assessment on changes as well. So what's upstream and downstream? If I'm going to change this, what may I impact?
Oh, no, it's not going to cause a problem. Oh, really? Well, there's been 20 incidents in the last week related to this particular thing. I can see that now.
And stop touching it.
Right.
All right, guys, so let's switch back to the presentation. Perfect. So I think the main lesson that we wanted to get across here is that this is an altogether better example in the sense that you've got System Center. You have all of those components. Once you put them together, you've got a really powerful story in terms of building out the cloud fabric, to monitoring that fabric and the infrastructure, to automating a lot of the tasks, and ultimately providing a self-service capability which allows your users, your consumers, to request service from IT. That allows you to deliver on service levels. So what we're seeing from our early adopters, our TAP customers, that are actually getting to leverage those benefits. So they're actually getting to provide this service to their customers and actually get them to self-service and do things themselves. So basically, in summary, it's a compelling integrated solution. You've got it in one box. It's called System Center. You've got all the pieces. The key thing is you need to deploy it in the right way, get it all configured, do the necessary things to make sure this all works, understand and do the planning, the preparation, and eventually you'll get a good and working private cloud. So thanks for that, guys. Have you got any questions?
There's one right up front here.
First thing I say is cloud, definition of cloud. There's a clearly stated definition of what cloud is now. And I don't think people should be saying they're running even a private cloud, they're running mental definitions.
Yeah.
I think, because otherwise it's just going to give the definition of cloud name.
So Catherine, what was the question?
So it was this statement about using the word cloud, like it's just thrown around a lot right now, like it's cloud schmoud, like I say a lot, and you need to kind of understand what those definitions of the cloud. So you're talking about the NIST.
Like, we saw the 4 core attributes.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah.
I think there's certain classic definitions and characteristics of what defines a cloud. Again, each customer has their own needs, requirements, and interpretation of what they really want to implement.
Well, I'm thinking, you have to. I just think you have to be service oriented to have a cloud, right? So you can go and install that stick when you go home, and you run up. But if you don't monitor, measure, even care about it, I wouldn't even call that a cloud because you're not focusing on the service management principles of cloud service delivery.
Were there
that
any
was
other
good
questions?
points, though. Are there right there? So
the question was, if a customer already has an existing operations manager installation, how do you go about integrating 2012 and doing the upgrade?
Yeah, and we had to plan it. Like that was a big thing. We had to plan it. And actually, my customer is on Ops Manager 2007 right now. they're still back. They still have to upgrade to 2012. So we looked at that. That wasn't critical. The critical thing was to put in virtual machine manager to do it and service manager for the portal experience. So they will get to it, and you can upgrade it. You can also run older versions of the connectors in Service Manager. They're compatible too. They're downward compatible.
There's a lot of options there. I just want to emphasize the key to getting the tight integration that I showed today. You do need 2012 components. Now, that doesn't mean you can't, like she's saying, piecemeal in older versions here and there, but have a path to get there.
Yeah.
Or else you're never going to realize that kind of the full capabilities of the stack.
Right? So, because my customer has about 700 virtual machines and probably 2 or 3 people actively running that environment. Right? So it's really hard for them to find time to do the upgrades right now. So they've brought on somebody new. Like they realized that they had reached capacity. But again, I think having that person whose focus is on the infrastructure and the tools and everything is key, right? Because I don't know how many customers go and install Ops Manager and just leave it, right? It's something you have to tune and take care of. You know, you have to give it exercise. You have to love it, take care of it. Yeah, yeah. Love your system center.
Okay.
You have a question?
Any other questions? Anyone?
There's a question here.
So the question was, did any of the customers use VMware? The answer is definitely yes. So yeah, what they use basically is they have their VMware stack, but they used VMM on top of that. And then all of the things we showed you are possible.
So there's 2 routes people take. There's native VMM support for ESX up to a certain version. There's also a vSphere integration pack for Orchestrator. So it has all of those things that you can easily build out runbooks that go talk natively to vSphere as well. Just depends on kind of the level of functionality, the version they're at, as to which route to take.
Yeah. My
Great
customer,
question.
my situation was actually, originally I was in there for a VMware Compete. So, but they're migrating from VMware to Hyper-V for the private cloud. The private cloud is just for Hyper-V, but they do have VMware in other areas.
Most of my customers are hybrid, right? A lot of VMware. So it's very important that they integrate. Yeah.
Any other questions?
A couple of us will still be available this evening at the Meet the Speakers event. So if you have something you want to discuss, maybe a little more in depth.
Anything that you've seen here, I can show you at the Expo Hall. We're at the services booth area as well there in the Microsoft Pavilion, and we'll be there all week.
Yeah, I'm there tomorrow at 9 a.m. till 12.
All right. Well, thanks again, everyone.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I think this gentleman had a question here. You had a